I still remember that cheap little printer in the clubhouse grinding and squeaking while it spat out 2 resignation letters. Ink a bit streaky ceilings still stained from the Hurricane 50 of my neighbors sitting in folding chairs. Watching the same HOA president who once tried to bill me $10 million for social responsibility sign her name with a shaking hand. Jason, the HOA lawyer, signed. Next, jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscle jumping, and it hit me in this weird, quiet way. I wasn't the selfish villain of Harbor Crest anymore. I was just the guy who refused to let them rewrite reality in my name. If you had told me a year before that I'd be standing there with an attorney at my side and a binder full of evidence dragging my own homeowners association into the light, I would have laughed and told you I already dealt with enough disasters at work. You know what I mean. My name is Mark Ellison. I'm a risk consultant, which is a fancy way of saying people pay me to imagine the worst thing that can happen, then build plans. So when it does happen, they don't go bankrupt or end up on the news. After my wife died, that part of my brain was kind of the only thing still working properly. So when I decided to leave our old place and start over, I did what broken people do. I grabbed onto the first picture of peace that didn't hurt to look at. For me, that picture was a glossy brochure for Harbor Crest, this coastal community, with palm trees, pastel houses, a pool, a clubhouse, people in golf carts smiling like they'd never had a bad day in their life. Most people saw paradise. My job wouldn't let me see only that. Harbor Crest sat wedged between the bay and the ocean-low streets, pretty little ponds that would become bathtubs in a storm. And my brain went, okay, what does 50 years of hurricane history look like here? So while my new neighbors were going to welcome wine night in the clubhouse, I was sitting under fluorescent lights at the county records office flipping through old damage reports and insurance maps, watching the same pattern repeat. Every 8 to 12 years, a major storm rolled through. Tore up roofs, flooded. First floors, knocked houses off slabs. Everyone cursed, bad luck rebuilt the same way, and waited for the next round. I decided my new life was not going to be held together by hope and vinyl siding, so I drew up plans for a house that could actually take a hit, not in theory. In numbers, reinforced concrete walls, impact glass, rated for serious wind, a roof that was basically a solid slab, bolted into a deep foundation backup power. Real shutters, the whole thing built strictly inside code, but pushed to the strongest version code allowed. On paper, my design checked every box in the Harbor Crest HOA handbook: height, roof, pitch setbacks, color palette. I knew that document better than some board members did, but it didn't look like the brochure versions of coastal charm. And that's when Linda knocked on my temporary front door. She showed up one hot afternoon in a blazer holding a folder and a smile polished enough to cut glass. "Mark, I'm Linda Marks, president of the Harbor Crest Homeowners Association." "Welcome," she said. The kind of voice people use when they're used to getting their way. She asked how I was settling in, told me Harbor Crest was special, that neighbors cared about each other. Then opened the folder and slid my house plans out like a teacher putting a test on the desk. "Some residents are concerned about this design," she said, tapping the concrete walls. "We try to maintain a certain coastal look, and this feels a little fortress-like." I told her I'd read the covenants cover to cover, that nothing in them prohibited concrete or impact glass, as long as I followed their dimensions and colors, and she blinked just a little too long, like she wasn't used to people quoting her own rules. "This isn't about violations, Mark. It's about being part of a community. We want homes that blend," she said. "We live in hurricane country," I answered. Blending in doesn't help when the wind hits 140. Her smile tightened at the corners. She said she hoped I'd reconsider for the sake of harmony, but I didn't. I built exactly what I'd planned. Over the next couple of years, my place turned into a running joke in the neighborhood. Concrete trucks in and out rebar piled in my driveway. Neighbors walking past, saying things like, "You building a bunker?" Mark and me just shrugging because, yeah, a little. Every few months, I'd get a politely passive-aggressive email from the HOA about maintaining the neighborhood aesthetic, and I'd reply with a screenshot of the section that said I was in compliance. The house went up anyway. By the time the last inspector signed off, my home was a gray solid box with hurricane glass and heavy doors sitting in a sea of pastel siding and fake shutters, and little comments started showing up in the newsletter about residents who forget they're part of something bigger. No names didn't need them. I paid my dues, mowed my lawn, minded my business, told myself that letting it slide was easier than going to war with people whose whole personality was telling others what color their mailbox could be. Then the weather map changed. Hurricane Naomi appeared like a dozen other storms, had just a swirl on a distant radar. And then the track tightened, and the color scale got angrier, and the meteorologist's voice dropped that half tone that says, "Okay, this one is real." Naomi's cone of uncertainty shrank until our stretch of coastline was right in the middle of it. My neighbors did what most people do. Lines at the home improvement store, people throwing random things in carts, plywood duct tape, bottled water fighting over the last generator like it was the last lifeboat. I had been getting ready since June. Generator tested fuel, stored safely. Water put away, shutters, checked emergency kit, labeled. Because that's just how my brain works. 2 days before landfall, the entire community got an email from the HOA with mandatory emergency meeting in the subject line, because of course it did. That night, the clubhouse was packed. Smells like stress sweat and burnt coffee. Naomi's red cone glowing on a pull-down screen behind Linda as she paced with a microphone like she was hosting a corporate town hall. She announced that the board had acted quickly to protect us and hired a contractor to install temporary metal storm panels on every house in Harbor Crest. Cost $3,500 per home. Billed automatically. Participation, she said, is not optional. This, according to her, was about safety and about presenting a united front against the storm. I raised my hand. I told her my house already had permanent hurricane-rated shutters and impact windows. Extra panels weren't going to make Naomi any less interested in us, so I'd be declining. You could feel people's eyes slide toward me. This isn't about individual choices, Mark. It's about solidarity and property values. If one home looks different, buyers notice, she said. Still smiling. Naomi isn't checking Zillow. She's checking Windload, I answered. The room let out this little ripple. Jason, the HOA lawyer, stepped in and started citing a section about community welfare in times of crisis. Saying the board had authority to act made it sound very official. The thing is, I'd read that section too. It used the word voluntary twice. So I said that out loud and let the word hang there. Linda's smile thinned. She closed the meeting by saying they would remember who chose to stand with Harbor Crest, and I walked home knowing I'd just been upgraded from weird neighbor to problem neighbor. Naomi arrived 3 nights later like a freight train. The wind pressed on the house so hard, it felt like the air had weight and went sideways. The whole structure hummed, and I sat there in my living room, lights on, watching the structural monitor on my phone, heart ticking up every time those numbers jumped. The concrete groaned. The windows bowed a little, then settled. The generator kicked on. When the grid died, and eventually the constant roar faded into that eerie, empty quiet that only comes after a storm has thrown everything around and moved on. When I opened my front door, Harbor Crest looked nothing like the brochure. Roofs peeled back like someone had opened canned siding scattered in yards. Palm trees snapped and lying across driveways. Cars shoved sideways. Those shiny metal storm panels everyone had been forced to buy. Twisted, ripped off, or flapping uselessly. My house was standing there with some scratches and a yard full of debris, but no structural damage. You'd think I'd feel proud, but what I mostly felt was grateful and heavy, because while my house had done exactly what I built it to do, my neighbors were walking around in shock, staring at holes where bedrooms used to be, picking up soaked photo albums, kids crying on the curb. So I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I dragged extension cords out to the porch, ran them from the generator. Set up power strips so people could charge their phones. Filled coolers with ice and water. Put out a camping stove so they could heat something taped a cardboard sign to the railing that said, "Free power. Water." And within an hour, my front steps looked like a small relief center. People sat on the porch, scrolling their phones, trying to reach family, trying to call insurance, trying to feel like they had some control again. Linda came by late that morning, hair pulled back, clothes wrinkled, eyes tired. She stopped in my driveway and just stared at my intact windows for a minute, then said very quietly, "Your house, it's like nothing even happened. I built it for this." I told her, and she nodded. "I should have listened," she said. Thanked me for the power and the water, in a voice that sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it, then turned and went back toward what was left of her own kitchen. For a day or two, I honestly thought maybe that was the lesson, that we'd move forward a little humbler, that people would stop pretending paint colors mattered more than building codes. Then a news helicopter flew over Harbor Crest. The local station aired aerial footage that night, and there was one shot they used over and over, a whole grid of damaged houses and destroyed roofs, with one square gray box sitting in the middle of it, looking like someone had dropped a bunker into a model village. My house. That image hit social media and did what the internet does. People I'd never met started asking why only one homeowner had built that way, what the HOA had done with all the money, whether the board had failed the community by focusing on charm over safety. Those questions weren't aimed at me. They were aimed at Linda and Jason. They did not appreciate that distinction. About a week after the storm, they called another emergency meeting. Same clubhouse, now smelling like bleach and wet carpet ceiling tiles, missing fans roaring. Residents sat in folding chairs, wearing the kind of exhaustion you can't fake. Megan, the treasurer, stood at the front with a stack of spreadsheets, hands shaking just enough to make the paper rattle. She walked us through the numbers. Millions in damage insurance, maybe covering half reserves lower than expected, and you could feel the anxiety thickening with every line. Then Jason took the mic. He started talking about equity and imbalances, said that one property in Harbor Crest had sustained no damage at all, while everyone else had suffered catastrophic losses. That this created an unfair distribution of burden the board had a responsibility to correct. Linda stepped up next to him, looked right at me and said, "My decision to build what she called an over-fortified structure showed I had capacity beyond the average resident, that I had benefited disproportionately from the storm." And then she dropped it. The board, she said, was assessing a special contribution of $10 million on my property to be paid into a community recovery fund as an act of social responsibility. For a second, I honestly thought she'd misspoken. Maybe she meant a smaller number and added a zero in her head. But she repeated it 10 million, and the room went dead quiet. Someone in the back let out this short, disbelieving laugh, then stopped. Every head turned toward me. I stood up, heart pounding, but voice steady, and asked Jason which exact clause in our covenants gave them the right to single out one homeowner for that kind of assessment. He started twisting that same community welfare in crisis section into a vague obligation talking about the spirit of the rules, not the letter. I told him the letter still counted. I reminded the room that the word voluntary was printed on that page twice. I told them that what they were doing wasn't community, it was extortion with better stationery. Linda cut in with that cold, polite tone and said no one was forcing me, of course, but the board would be documenting my refusal and sharing it. So everyone understood who was willing to help Harbor Crest rebuild and who preferred to hide behind concrete. That was the moment it clicked that this was never really about money. They didn't just need cash. They needed someone to blame. Over the next few days, the HOA Facebook group blew up. A polished little PDF started circulating called The Fortress Problem, full of pictures of my house next to wrecked ones and long paragraphs about engineered selfishness and moral duty. A few of the same people who'd been sitting on my porch using my power were suddenly commenting about how disappointing it was that some residents refused to contribute. And then one morning I walked outside to see the word selfish sprayed across my front wall in red paint, 3 feet tall. Yeah, that happened. Standing there looking at it, I realized keeping my head down hadn't kept the peace. It had just made it easier for them to swing at me. That night, I cleared my kitchen table, printed out the covenants, opened my laptop, and pulled out a legal pad. The risk consultant part of my brain finally took the wheel. I stopped thinking like a guy under attack and started treating Harbor Crest like a messy client that needed an audit. I reread the community welfare section circled voluntary twice. Then the next morning, I emailed Megan a formal request for 3 years of HOA financial records, cited the Florida statute that says homeowners are allowed to see how their money is handled, and waited. When the PDF finally hit my inbox, I made coffee and started going through it line by line. It didn't take long. They'd billed roughly 40 homes, $3,500 each for those storm panels. That's about $140,000. The invoice to the contractor, a company called Coastal Barrier Solutions, was for $80,000. That left around $60,000 floating in the middle with no obvious explanation. I looked up Coastal Barrier Solutions in the state business registry. It had been formed 3 weeks before Naomi. The registered agent was Jason, our HOA lawyer. The address was a mailbox store. No office, no history, no real business. I pulled permit records for our neighborhood. There were no permits on file for panel installation in Harbor Crest. So now we had a brand new shell company tied to the HOA lawyer, no permits, a $60,000 gap, and the same people trying to paint me as the problem. I needed a witness. I walked over to my neighbor Tom's half-gutted house, sat with him on an upside-down storage bin in what used to be his living room, fans roaring drywall dust everywhere, and laid it out. He nodded slowly like a bunch of little things suddenly made sense. Then he told me Linda had come by after the storm and hinted that if he backed the board's position on me, they might work with him on his assessments. Jason had apparently warned a few residents that if they didn't redirect the narrative, insurance investigators might start asking hard questions about the board's decisions. I asked Tom if he'd be willing to repeat that on record. He said yes. I hit record on my phone and let him talk. By the time I walked into an HOA attorney's office with a binder under my arm, I had bank statements, state filings, screenshots of the smear campaign photos of the graffiti Tom's recording, and copies of every relevant page of the covenants. The lawyer's name was Natalie. She flipped through my binder slowly, a little smile creeping in. "They really thought no one would check," she said, shaking her head. "How public do you want this to be?" We requested a formal hearing which by law had to be open to all residents. Notices went out. Word spread. A local reporter showed up because small-town drama, plus money, plus hurricane, is basically his Super Bowl. The clubhouse filled up again, still half-repaired drywall seams, showing that damp paint smell mixed with curiosity. Natalie did a short, calm introduction, then handed me the clicker for the projector. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel like I was on defense. I put my building permits and inspection reports up first, so nobody could say my house was some rogue project. Then the community welfare section, with voluntary highlighted, so everyone could read the same word. I'd been yelling into the void. Then the numbers, what they billed for panels, what they actually paid the $60,000 in the middle that went somewhere. Then the state document showing Jason's name on coastal barrier solutions. I read the conflict of interest rule out loud. I played Tom's recording so everyone could hear Linda's "we can work with you" in her own voice. And then I clicked to the last slide. It was simple. I told them I wanted the $10 million assessment withdrawn and acknowledged in writing as baseless. I wanted Linda and Jason to resign from the board. And I wanted an independent audit of HOA finances. If those three things didn't happen, I said I'd be filing complaints and lawsuits and letting the state pull the rest of the threads. For a few seconds, the room was just quiet. Then someone in the back started clapping. Someone else stood up and said they wanted their $3,500 back. Another voice asked how long the board had been treating HOA money like their private account. The room didn't turn on me. It turned on them. Linda tried to talk about good faith and difficult decisions in a crisis. But every time she said good faith, someone laughed. When a usually quiet guy named Raymond called for a recall vote right there, hands went up all over the room. They had to print resignation letters on that same sad little printer that started this story. Ink light in some spots, paper curling a bit from the humidity. I watched Linda's hand shake as she signed. Jason barely looked up when he signed his. And I can't lie, I felt tired, but I also felt this deep, calm kind of right. So that's how we went from "Mark is selfish" sprayed across my wall to "Linda and Jason resign" printed at the top of a meeting summary. From my concrete house being the thing everyone whispered about, to that same house being the place where people charged their phones and watched the people who tried to crush me lose their titles instead. I'm not going to pretend I enjoyed any of this. It cost me sleep, friends, peace. There were nights I seriously thought about selling and leaving, letting someone else deal with the wreckage. But every time I got close to walking away, I remembered that meeting where Linda said they would document my refusal and show everyone exactly who I was, like my character was just another form they got to fill out. That was the line for me. So now I'm curious what you think. If you were in my shoes, would you have paid something for the sake of peace, or would you have pushed back the way I did? Do you think I went too far? Not far enough, or landed somewhere close to fair? Have you ever gone up against an HOA, a boss, a committee, any little pocket of power that thought it could change the rules whenever it was scared or embarrassed? If you have, tell me about it in the comments. Tell me what you did, what you wish you'd done, Argue with me if you want. And if you want to hear more real-life mess like this hit, share this with someone who loves a good plot twist and subscribe, because apparently I have a talent for annoying exactly the wrong kind of people. And something tells me Harbor Crest won't be the last time someone tries to invoice me for not failing with everyone else.